Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest aliens and UFOs video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one yet again based on one of your newer suggestions. This one admittedly having very little info associated with it, but the stuff that is tied there is still very fascinating, and there's a chance of it being a mixtape of sorts, and that's because it could apparently involve the world of cryptids. Quite fascinating. When I was reading this information, it reminded me of one of my past videos, and I'll include the link for it below, the one involving a Bigfoot that actually came out of a UFO. Here in this case, we might have yet another type of cryptid coming from an encounter there in a UFO, but very limited info. Again, we don't even have names associated with the witnesses, but at least we have a location and we have a time period, and it's essentially known as this. You're looking at a representation of it now. It's known as the 1973 Hellhounds from a UFO landing. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the interesting info associated with this. And again, I'll try to include as much as I can for it. So here's essentially what happened. You have to go back to 1973, September 9th to be specific, presumably during the nighttime, and then that's when this situation occurred. This 1972 period marks an interesting time because apparently there was a huge wave of UFO sightings, UFO landings, UFO encounters that happened during that specific year. There's too many to name here. I might just pick and choose other ones in the future. But here, this exact location where this encounter occurred was there in Savannah, Georgia. And in fact, if you want to go even more specific, you have to go to a place called the Laurel Grove Cemetery, which you're looking at here. As you can see, it's pretty much condensed with so many cemetery plots and so many cemetery stones, headstones in other words. And to me, that plays an important role here in a minute when I mention about this UFO landing, because as always, I'm trying to find where in that exact cemetery, in this case, where that UFO would have actually landed. But here's what occurred on that fateful, presumably, night. So on September 9th, 1973, there were several young men, or several youths, it could involve actually young women as well, that were roaming about in that cemetery. No one knows exactly what they were doing there, but presumably, as always involving cemeteries and youths, there's always a chance that they were ghost hunting. Hey, I do that too as well on my end, at least when it comes during the daytime, never at night unless of course there's permission involved. But considering their youths, and then considering the situation of the location, and then considering the nighttime potential chance, it's presumed that they were there just loitering or doing something else within the cemetery, just doing about their business. And on that fateful night, though, that's when they had this once in a lifetime encounter with this UFO landing. So how about that? Doing something they shouldn't really be doing, and they kind of get rewarded by finding this extraordinary UFO landing. So here's what occurred. As they were wandering about that cemetery, minding their own business, that's when they suddenly saw, I don't know if it was right near them, close by, or if it happened to land, let's say, in the further corner of one of the cemetery plots. Either way, though, these teenagers witnessed a very, very bright UFO. It was glowing very brightly. In fact, it must have been illuminating the entire cemetery itself with the kind of with the lights coming from it. I don't know if it was just one solid light. I don't know if it had that spinning set of lights that other UFOs had. Again, just so much limited info, but it was there. It was landing at their location, and then that's when they saw this. By the way, I don't know if it quote-unquote landed, meaning it had extended arms or legs on the bottom that it used to hit the ground with, or, as you've seen in other cases, if this UFO was simply hovering slightly above the ground, and that was its form of landing. Again, too much limited info. But either way, though, it was definitely stationary above the ground itself in some way or some manner. And then that's when they witnessed this next phenomenal thing. A door opened, if you could call it that, from the UFO, and then from it, 10, this was their quote, 10 big black hairy dogs. That's right, 10 big black hairy dogs pretty much just shot out straight from the door, and they ran into the night. It must have taken just seconds for the entire encounter itself. Because once they saw these hairy dogs come out from that quote-unquote doorway, they shot off right into the night, and then presumably they just disappeared, no doubt into the foliage or whatever type of forestry type area is there. And then that was it. There was really nothing else in terms of these creatures, whatever they were. If they were cryptids or if they were something else, there was no other type of encounters with them throughout the rest of the night. And I was saying earlier, this is a good mixtape of sorts when it comes to cryptids, because the first image that came to mind on my end, big black hairy dogs, are werewolves, right? You hear about the legends associated with them, werewolves, and then about their locations or their presumed locations, and about the fact that there are almost urban legends of sorts. Well, here you have these big black hairy dogs, 10 of them to be specific. They could in fact be werewolves, and for whatever reason they're tied to this UFO. And then when they got let loose, they just pretty much ran out there into the nighttime of Savannah, Georgia, never to be seen by these youths again. But otherwise, after this encounter, the UFO itself, which again previously was growing very, very brightly, I don't even know if it was like a yellowish glow, orange glow, a white glow, anything like that, it started to dull. And when it did so, it's almost like it almost turned off its entire light. And then at that point, either these youths ran away, obviously in some kind of fear of what they just encountered, or this UFO more likely just shot up into the sky and disappeared. And that was pretty much the last of it, the last they saw of this UFO and of these 10 big black hairy dogs. So how about that? When it comes to this encounter, here you have the potential chance of a UFO along with some cryptids, whatever these hairy dogs were, coming from it and then disappearing, and then that's it, presumably still somewhere out there in Savannah, Georgia, or who knows where else. It's almost, it's over 50 years when it comes to this encounter, so there's a good chance that they moved about to someplace else. But those of you there in Savannah, Georgia, you're in luck. You may have a chance of seeing this UFO there, especially if you go to that Laurel Grove Cemetery there in Savannah. But I wanted to mention this too. I was talking about it just a little bit earlier. This location, this cemetery, I don't think it would have landed like with those tripods or whatever type of legs it had, because again, look at what you're seeing here. There's pretty much no spot for it to land. Everything is there in terms of these headstones. Every single area is filled with them. For something as large as a UFO, you would have had to have something that was clear enough to be able to hit the ground and not hit these headstones at the same time. So that goes back to what I was mentioning earlier. I think it was pretty much just hovering above some part of the ground, and then this doorway probably spit out like a tongue, if you could call it, something like that, where it was a platform of sorts, and then that's where these 10 big black hairy dogs would have shot out from and then landed on the ground and then run off. That would have been quite startling to see, especially the ferocity associated with these werewolf-like creatures. But yeah, that's my theory, at least, that that's what essentially occurred here, and then that's when they ran off into the night and the UFO would have never landed. So that's important on my end, because you know how you read those stories about other UFO landings, the ones that truly do hit the ground, how they leave some kind of imprint, right? Like they leave some kind of circle, some burned image, something else where the grass never grows again, those kind of stories. Here, I don't think you have anything like that. So if you go there to the Laurel Grove Cemetery and you're trying to find this exact spot, you're going to have a very hard chance, considering the logistics of how this thing would have quote-unquote landed. But that's pretty much it as far as this encounter, these Hellhounds from a UFO Landing 1973 one. If anybody has any more information, anything else I might have missed, how about those of you there in Savannah, Georgia? Have you been to that cemetery? If so, and you've seen some unusual stuff, then please post it in the comments below. Those of you that haven't but live near the area, here's your chance. You could definitely go do so during the daytime, of course, or try to get permission if you can at night. And then once you get that cleared, then you'll have a chance to see if there's anything unusual. And then who knows, maybe you might see these werewolves somewhere off in the distance. But alright, everybody, love to hear what your comments are below. Take care, everyone. Bye.